It's really interesting the last couple of years. Instagram and all other social media has just exploded with tons of tactical trainers. Now, listen, there are some really good guys out there. Don't get me wrong. They're not all, bad. But what's really interesting is the guys that are doing the real work, really teaching not only the real units and real operators, but also civilians in the most effective methods. They're kind of hard to get a hold of. And I'm very fortunate that I've been able to interview people. Now, I've had my interview, obviously, with Bill Rapier. We've had, the guys from SIAC Tactical and Tom Kyer. And now I was able to finally get Kyle DeFoor in on this. And Kyle DeFoor is somebody I've been wanting to talk to for quite some time. And you talk about a guy that is busy. Kyle's a former SEAL, really well known in the industry. He's been doing this for quite some time, and he's highly, highly respected. Completely humble guy too. Funny as heck. Don't get me wrong. He's very confident in what he does, but he's just very, very straightforward. His classes, as soon as he puts his schedule out, you got to grab a slot right away. Now, Kyle is the first to tell you he is not the guy to go to for basic firearms training. And the reason I want you to hear about this is because he gives not only some really great information on how to, if you've never shot before, or if you're just starting out, he gives probably one of the best tips that I've really heard on how to buy guns correctly and which gun to use first and which gun to use second, and then whatever you're going to carry. It's probably one of the cleanest things I've heard, because there's just so much back and forth about what gun to carry and all this other stuff. And he really is great on all the technical and tactical reasoning behind why he trains people the way he trains them. And again, just like Bill Rapier, and they're both friends, by the way, they train you for real gunfighting, to use your gun the way you need to use it if, God forbid, you ever had to protect yourself and your family. So again, this guy's bona fides are just amazing, and I hope you enjoy my interview with Kyle DeFoor. Kyle, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to the audience here. It's been a while. I mean, you're such a busy dude that it's nice. We finally tracked you down at a hotel, and you're taking some time to talk with us today.
Yeah.
Hey, they got the intro from me, but what would you like people to know about yourself and your approach to training and everything? Obviously, your bona fides are they speak for themselves. But what I think is interesting is, yes, you came from the unit. You work in that world. You work with those tier 1 groups. But the fact that you can also translate all this stuff down to civilians, and can you talk a little bit about, the challenge of civilians versus, versus training, some of the professionals that you train?
Yeah. So, that's a good question. I mean, the military units and the LA units that I train, it's, you kind of know what you're getting into when you go in there. For example, they may have certain SOPs or certain things that they have to do. Their gear is typically going to be, for the most part, a lot of people don't believe this, but they use one type of sight. They use one rifle. It's not like a mixed bag of things. Whereas on the civilian side, you'll get a lot of different. The class I was just in these 2 days, 14 people. I had 11 different types of setups,
right.
Scopes, rifles, that kind of thing. So you get a little bit more consistency on the gear and the SOPs and the tactics that are being used with the military and law enforcement groups. And civilian, you're going to get, you could well end up with a dozen different types of gun setups. I've done classes that are open enrollment, which means anybody can come, but it's actually been all law enforcement. And it was 12 law enforcement guys from 12 different jurisdictions that, some of the things are not all exactly the same. So, an interesting point, I'll be honest, I learned more really training civilians as far as the gear goes, because most civilians are on top of it. Whereas the military, they might want a certain piece of gear, but, through the procurement process, it takes them a long time to get it. So that's a couple of interesting dynamics of the difference between a civ class and a gov class.
It's interesting. Yeah. Well, and oftentimes, the civilians, oftentimes they've got the deeper pockets to buy the newest stuff.
Yeah.
Oftentimes in there, even though they probably don't necessarily know how to get the most out of that stuff, which is why they come to you. Is it more of a challenge for you to, when you're dealing with professionals, they've got certain profiles they see all the time, certain scenarios. Obviously they have mission profiles and SO, rules of engagement, and they also have force continuums that you can always work within. With a civilian, you've got you really don't know what the scenario is they would be facing. Obviously, they're going to be carrying, and then they're not a trained professional, meaning it's not their profession to go around and do this all the time. Yet, if they're going to protect themselves, you've got the job of taking somebody who has a basic knowledge of firearms. And I think we should be clear about that, meaning, coming to one of your courses. In fact, why don't we start there? If you're a civilian and I wanted to come to one of your courses, what base level training would you want me to have? And could you help people seek out? I read on your website, choosing an instructor. You had some great points on that. And can you kind of elaborate on how to prep to come to a class like yours? Because I think that's where a lot of people screw up. They go places and they end up with maybe some bad habits or some training that's less than optimal.
Yeah. So the guys that come to my open enrollment classes, I would tell them that it's not a beginner class by any means. And that's not, I want to make sure everybody understands. The only reason I'm not doing beginner type classes anymore is because I've been doing this for so long, I really don't have to. So a lot of what I get, I'm at about 70% repeats for open enrollment. So guys kind of know what they're getting into. We do get some guys new into there. And I put there on the website, email me if you're a little bit like, if you're asking a question, like, am I ready for this? And I think at this point, it's more of a reputation thing. Like, guys kind of know what they're going to get when they come, very fast, very accurate shooting, high standards, manipulations that, gun manipulations with both pistol and rifle that we're not, it's just not something a new person would be able to do. As far as like where to get good initial baseline training, I personally think this is the one thing in our industry that is lacking, because everybody wants to come into this thing and they want to train all the guys up here, which I tell even new instructors that are quote unquote pros like me, you cannot make a living training these guys up here because there's not enough of them. You need to understand that first, and then I think really to be a better overall instructor, you should start at the baseline where I started, where a lot of my contemporaries started, where you are doing a basic pistol class, you are doing a basic rifle class, because it will teach us how to teach better. But the overall answer to the question, I think right now your answers are in some of the academies, meaning like 6 Hour Academy, places along those lines that have a basic handgun or a basic carbine, because a big reputable place like that, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to teach anything wacky. They're probably going to teach, 101 type stuff, which is good, but that gives a person enough time to kind of get used to manipulating a weapon. Obviously safety, which is, paramount. That's the first thing we're all worried about anyway. I think the big academies like that are the way to go for people who are like, okay, I've bought a gun and this is what I'm doing now. And, where do I go? That would be my suggestion, because those places like that are more responsible. A local guy, it's like, you don't know what you're going to get. And then I would tell people overall, like, let's say you go to a basic pistol class at, whatever academy, rifle range, something that's reputable, that's big, that is not going to put out any bad info. Like, I would tell people that understand that, basic is basic, and like coming as you're kind of coming up that rung, and you're working your way up to a higher performance standard. I would say it's kind of like as you're a new driver, like, you're not going to get at 16 years old. You don't get a Porsche. You don't get a Corvette.
Right.
You get whatever, something. And a little bit through your life, you get, a moderately good car, and then, when you're older and you've got a lot of experience, and, you get your Corvette. And that's kind of how this thing works. Like, and I see it like, I would say, a couple of times a year. It does not happen much, 2 to 3 times a year. I'll get a guy in a class who's had no formal training. He's kind of YouTubed it. He's kind of Instagrammed it. He finds me, and for however reason he finds me, and he comes, and he is so far outside. Like I've got 12 guys that are rocking, or 11 guys that are rocking. Then I got this guy who's like just trying to tread water. So I think people need to understand, as with anything, we wouldn't do a jiu-jitsu class. It's not like you're going to go off the street. I'm going to go roll with a purple belt. I mean, this is not how it works. I mean, you got to kind of work your way up there. And I do realize, I think the industry realizes as a whole that the lack is in the baseline training. But that's the only thing that I can honestly say to people is the big academies and the big businesses like that. I know that they're going to do a good job of making sure a person is safe and making sure they understand the basics before they get into this big time and start heading to people like me.
What that's super helpful. And it's really funny you're saying that, because we were talking a little bit before we started the interview, and I agree. That's my hardest thing, is recommending where people should go for the initial training. Once they have the initial training, then I can point them to people like you. And that's exactly, it's funny you're saying that. I used to work, I worked with the Bondurant school for a while, high performance driving school. And we did that back in the 90s, and everybody used to come through there, and it was fun. But you're absolutely right. I was a decent driver, but I couldn't get in like the NASCAR cars right away or anything. I really had to train to get up to that. Right. And it's that level. But what's interesting is if you put that foundation in correctly, then it makes a class, a more advanced class, that much more challenging and better for you, because you're not lost. I imagine the guy you were talking about that wasn't prepared for your class, he was probably trying to, just keep his head above water, and he probably got very little out of the experience compared to some of the more experienced shooters.
Oh yeah, it was bad. I mean, like, and on that thing, I think you just brought up probably the best analogy that people watching this can get, is that, like, I've obviously been to Bondurant, I've been to O'Neill, I went to all those schools as well. If you think about like baseline, when you're 15 or 16 years old and you're learning to drive a car, how do they teach you to do gas and brake? 1 foot, right? Mm-hmm. We know that when we go to these performance schools, we're using 2 feet. Now, in some cases, not all the time, but in certain cases, if you look at that, like you can understand that in the shooting realm, a guy or a gal goes to a basic class. Now you're looking at, they're taught this, then they start edging up or coming to me or somebody else, and they're like, well, the basic class said this, and you're saying this, and it's the opposite thing. It's like, well, it's not the opposite. It's just that it's different, because I don't have to worry about you being unsafe now, and I don't have to worry about you understanding how to reload now, and those kind of things. But I think the driving analogy is a good one. Can you imagine a 16-year-old kid going to Bondurant or O'Neill Racing School?
That's just I mean, it'd be a nightmare.
It'd be a complete waste of everybody's time. Yeah, right. I mean, it's like,
and he'd be a danger to himself and anybody else on the track if he was on there. At that point. Now, and I think that's what people. It's so strange. Is I don't know what it is as adults. I constantly try to take up a new skill once a year to be that student again, put on that white belt and learn from scratch something that I suck at and try to get better, so I can be a better instructor in what I do, so I can do that. But what's really funny is when you do that, even me, even though I want to do that and I logically know what it's at, the first time I go to do something new, there's so much resistance, because I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to look, and I have a inflated idea of what my abilities are, and you quickly get humbled, if you're taking on anything that requires any sort of proficiency. You're there, but I don't know why it is that as we get older, we don't want to put the time in to put the foundations in, especially with something as important as firearms. I know so many people, especially during COVID, that contacted me. One of my other businesses is I have we manufacture class 3 weapons, and we have a tourist range out here in Vegas, and we do a lot of stuff like that. So of course, a lot of my friends know that. People that never had any interest in firearms were calling me desperately looking for firearms during COVID. And what's interesting is the vast majority of those people, once they got that, I don't even know if they unboxed it. They probably just threw it in a safe, and I doubt they've even, gone for any sort of training whatsoever.
Right.
That to me is really more disturbing than anything else. Is imagine like, it's like buying a car, and then, you never learn how to drive until the one day you need to go somewhere, and you just jump in the car. And you think you're going to figure it out then,
Same deal.
And the one thing that I really like about, once they have the foundation, they come to somebody like you can take somebody with a really good, solid foundation. And then I've seen the results of what you can get people to do. And it's really interesting, but without that solid foundation, they're not going to be able to do a lot of the stuff that they may see. Like if they're looking at some of your training or clips of people that have trained with you, they're going, oh yeah, I want to do that. But they haven't put in the right amount of time to get there, and make the most out of it. And I think that's interesting that you've identified yourself like, hey, I am not the person to come to for beginner training. And you've established that reputation, and not in an arrogant way, just in an honest way, going, hey, this is my sweet spot. This is where I can really help people the most. And, you're gonna have to put some work in before you come see me.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing I tell people too, is like, I want people to understand, I don't do it's not that I don't do basic classes, because I think I'm better than that now. And you got to understand, I've been doing this since 2004, pre-internet, pre-Facebook, pre-Instagram. I did basic classes for 7 or 8 years.
Right.
So I've put that time in as a professional, and in doing so, I built a plethora of students that, I could probably just keep doing classes on students that I've trained 12 or 15 years ago. So I think, we're talking about the student a lot. We should also talk about the instructor a little bit, and make sure guys realize, like, you've got to start somewhere, man. I mean, I established a baseline of basic, students that they're the guys now who are masterclass, in USPSA. They're the guys who are doing this and doing that and all this other stuff. Like, I established that base years ago. I think that's an important thing to kind of point out. Like, it's not that I'm trying to do, it's just that that's where I'm at now. And I think, I like it because I will say selfishly, what it does is I'm able to push myself a little bit more, because, you get in a class with, a dozen guys who can burn it down. You better bring your A game, or, it's not going to look good. So, and same on the military side. I didn't start out training, these high-end units. And again, there's just not that many high-end units. You cannot make a living out of training high-end units.
Right.
But it's nice to see guys that I saw when they were in the military for 4 or 8 years, and now they're at 20 or 25 years, and I'm being invited back to those units, and those guys are really good shooters. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I think, I don't know why this popped in my head, but I would tell you a story that when I was out in Frisco about a month ago. I was out in Frisco for about a week doing classes. A buddy of mine's a former professional skateboarder, and he took me out to dinner. And we're eating dinner, and a couple of his current pro skateboarders are with him. Now, I don't know these guys, because I don't really track that stuff anymore, but we're all hanging out, drinking beers. And the interesting thing that I found with these guys is they're talking the way me and you are talking about skateboarding.
Mm-hmm.
And the common thing that they kept bringing up was, like, these kids nowadays, they want to buy a board and they want to start doing these tricks out of the gate. They haven't spent time in the park. They haven't spent, time in the driveway, yada, yada. And all three of those guys that live in downtown Frisco were telling me, like, we ride our boards everywhere, like we ride our board to work,
Yeah.
And when it's raining, we're on our board, and what started clicking in my mind is like, when a basic student is wanting to get to be a more advanced student, I'm like, man, you got to have a gun in your hand, bro. Like, you got to have a gun in your hand. You don't have to shoot. It's just manipulation. Like you can practice, you can dry fire 75% of everything. You can do reloads. You can do all that inside your house. And I just thought it was the most interesting thing that, first off, I'm having dinner with 3 professional skateboarders, and we're basically talking about the mindset of being professional at the thing you're in. And the bottom line is, it comes down to the same thing. You kind of got to be obsessed with it, and you got to have it in your hand, or in their case, on your feet all the time.
That you just said something that I think is interesting, because there's a misnomer all the time. You shoot, you get people to really improve their speed and their accuracy on everything. Can you talk a little bit about the learning process? I tend to see a lot of people try to ramp up speed wise prior to going, you're just really learning the motions and getting things through and laying down that, I got, lack of a better word, muscle memory on things. Like, people really don't want to, they want to try to use speed that they haven't really earned yet. And do you have issues with that with some of your shooters, your newer people that come in? Do they try to do manipulations too fast and they don't put the time into what you're talking about? I saw you recently, there was one of your posts, and you were just in your hotel room, and you were showing people dry firing in your hotel room.
Oh yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool. Like, I remember being one of the first times I ever went to one of the big shooting events. I was walking down the hallway to my room, and everybody was a professional shooter that was in there, and I could hear it. I could hear everybody dry firing as I'm going by and everything. It was really funny. But can you talk a little bit to that? I mean, I think people will be blown away about the idea that 75% of the manipulations and training that you can do without live fire.
Yeah. So I guess if you want a quick, so the thing we can't practice in shooting is multiple rounds and feeling recoil and resetting the trigger. We can't do that, obviously, right? So that would be, let's say, multiple rounds with splits. That's what I can't really practice, because I don't get felt recoil on a dry fire, and me resetting on recoil is, it's just not really, you can't do that without live rounds. But the draw stroke, I mean, simple things on a pistol, the draw stroke into the first shot. I mean, you don't need rounds to do that.
Right.
You need a timer, and you need a target, and you need, 7 yards or whatever your thing is. Rifle, same deal. Ready positions, whether it's a high ready or a low ready. I don't need rounds to do that. So a lot of people can get a lot done without shooting. Now there is a point in there, again, with the felt recoil and working splits and doing multiple rounds. We're gonna have to actually shoot bullets. The other thing is, to really get data return on accuracy, you're going to have to go to the 100 or 200 or 300 yard line or 25 yard line, whatever it might be for the weapon system you're using. You're going to have to do that. But you, like I said, it's like 75% you can do without shooting.
Right.
So, we try to, so what I've done in the past year, essentially post-COVID, what I've done is I've made a concerted effort in open enrollment classes. I do it in the military as well, but the military classes are a 5-day format, so it's a different ball game.
Right.
But in a 2-day class for open enrollment, I have basically set up curriculum that these guys, I teach them how to dry fire everything that they can. I actually, and I do it in a way that the class, we don't really lose anything time-wise in the class. The other thing I do that I've started putting in is I'm having it's about an hour. It really depends on how good they shoot. I've seen it happen in 30 minutes and I've seen it take 2 hours. But at the end of the day, of the second day, I teach my students how to teach themselves. And at the same time, you know, a byproduct of that is they kind of learn how to teach someone else, because we've got so many students, you know, 12 to 14 in an open enrollment class, that I've got one guy running the timer, I got one guy keeping score, and I got one guy calling hits and miss, and I got one guy shooting, and then they just keep rotating that out. And I don't know, that has become like a thing. Like, guys are loving it, and they're learning, like they learn how to use a pro timer. They learn now. And what I do is I have them get so much data on themselves that when they leave there, they literally, you know, they can take that data and they can go, okay, well, here's what I got to work on. Right. So let's say what I just did today, we just got done a couple, you know, hour before we started this, was carbine. So like, one of the things I'm doing carbine was a low ready, you know, low ready position, single shot, you know, at 7 yards on a 6-inch target. And it's just kind of range restrictions. That's what I kind of had to work with. Right. Well, I know what that time is. So now those guys have a list that's been written down of what their time was. And they can average that up, and they can say, okay, well, I can't make what Kyle says the standard is. And now that's something they can work on. And by the way, no rounds needed. They can do that in their house, you know, with a pro timer. So I've made a point to do that. You know, so I would say COVID gave us a couple of good things. That would be one of them. The other one would be the way I do targets now, because I'm putting so much curriculum into 2-day classes. I basically, every time a guy shoots, he puts a new target up, which it costs me a little bit more money, but it's inconsequential to what the student is getting in the long run, which is a data return that is like, it's almost, I've had guys tell me in class, this is a little bit overwhelming. They're like, I've got so many data points, it's a little bit overwhelming. I'm like, well, you need that, because that's the only way you're going to figure out what you need to work on, you know, and what you don't need to do anymore, which, you know, a lot of people, they want to train the stuff they're good at. I'm like, you don't need to do that. You're good. Don't do slow fire at 100 yards anymore. You're good. Like, do fast at 100 yards. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's getting that kind of feedback is huge. I mean, and that's really interesting. I mean, that correlates to a lot of other training that totally different, but the process is the same, meaning getting those key data points and knowing what to work on versus what you like to work on is really key. And I want to also, you know, I know some people are probably listening to this and they're already like, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, you know, already. And it's not that way. I mean, it is really a fun process, and you learn a lot about yourself, and remember what you're training for. I mean, you're training, if you know, God forbid you ever have to do it, you're gonna be responsible for every one of those rounds that comes out of that gun. And you got to be damn sure that, you know, you're justified in doing what you're doing. And also, you know, if it is that threat and it is that black swan event where you have to protect yourself and your family, you want to make damn sure you hit what you shoot at, you know? And so you train it, but it can be, it's a life skill that you should be really excited to have, you know? I mean, it's everybody I know. And the cool part about it is, you know, it also is well into your, you know, later part of your life, you can be extremely competent with a firearm. Whereas some of the other physical things, I mean, I'm just starting in my 50s, and so I'm starting to realize that I'm not that 20-year-old anymore. And, you know, you have to compensate for that. And firearms is a great way of doing that, and learning, you know, putting the time into, you know, the drills that you're talking about, and getting those data points is huge.
Yeah. And so one thing I would tell you too, the first part of your question, I almost forgot, but here's kind of the thing that I think students, you know, they're smart enough with the social media now that they can figure it out. But like, I'll give the secret away. I mean, it's not really a secret, but like, you know, a good teacher will know this, right? Tom Kyer knows this. I can tell you that. You know, Bill Rapier knows this. Like, so in that piece of instruction, it has to go like this. It has to go classroom piece first. Now, when I say classroom, I don't ever go, like, the only time I go inside on a range is if we got like horrible weather. I mean, my classroom is on the range. So I'm showing whatever, the draw stroke. Let's just, everybody understand that. I'm teaching the draw stroke. So classroom portion. The next piece is drill. Rep it. That's the next piece. This is the logical order of teaching. You show it in a classroom, you have them drill it. And even that in itself, you're separating different people now in how they do that. Okay, but let's that's a little too much now for probably the audience. But so classroom, drill, the last part is scenario, right?
Yep.
So if you just humans love three things. I mean, it's a proven fact, three things: classroom, drill, scenario. If you remember that, if you don't remember anything else, remember that. So if you're going to a piece of training and you're kind of getting classroom, but you're not really getting any drill time, and then you're going right to scenario, something's probably fucked up, right? Yeah. I mean, it's not going to work out. It can't. It's just not the way it works out. Now, I will tell you, I see that a lot in both the student and kind of other people who do this for a living, because they're trying to get to this mountaintop that is like not accomplishable in 2 or 3 or 4 days or whatever. That's the way it has to be: classroom, drill, scenario. And I'm giving you the easy nuts and bolts of it. The verbiage wise, classroom could take a long time. I mean, you look at the scope class I did, the last scoped rifle class I did, classroom on zeroing a scoped rifle, when you have half the students that have MOA and the other half that have MIL, that's a classroom, dude. You know what I mean? That's like, and you got one side that doesn't understand the other side. It's a nightmare. Okay, the drill on that, it takes a little bit of time because they're both so dramatically different. Now, the scenario on that part, the scenario could be a speed drill. It could be targets at different distances. It could be, we're not going to dial, we're going to do hold overs and unders, things like that. But I think a lot of people nowadays, they try to go classroom to scenario without doing the drill a lot. And it goes back to that same thing we're talking about, where there's no free lunch. You got to put the time in. And that's kind of like, I think if people understand that and they look for instructors that know that, well, I mean, we just told everybody, so maybe everybody knows now, but like that's how it doesn't matter what you learn. That's how you're going to have to, there's no other way to do it.
Yeah. And I get it. There are a lot of guys, and social media has been good and really bad in some ways, because of course, a lot of guys, a lot of instructors do the hot shots, basically, where they're saying, hey, you'll get out and you'll be able to do this in a day. And that's what they cut out. They cut out the drilling that will actually put in the right skill set to get the result, because the person wants to go into scenario right away, because scenarios are, quote unquote, fun or challenging or whatever. But, I've just found that's the same thing. And that's why I was really looking forward to speaking with you, because I know that's, there's no compromise in your approach. And because it's such a serious matter, meaning you want to make damn sure the product that you're putting out and you're giving to people, you realize, they might not need to use this information to save their life. And if that's the case, then you have an ethical responsibility to give them the best information you can and the best training you can. You can't cut corners.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a lot of, I'm very lucky in the aspect of the military as a whole has trusted me to, there's only, really 3 of us in this industry that have been direct contracted to train guys for an upcoming real world mission. And, that right there, when that's coming and you're like, oh man, dude, the phrase you better have your shit wired when you go in there is an understatement of the century, Yeah. And the fact that they would even let you know that they're doing that ahead of time is good enough. But, sometimes I wish they wouldn't tell me that. Sometimes I would just let me do my thing, but, puts a little bit more pressure on you. But that right there will tune you up to a point where you're like, I cannot put out bad info. So, I try to tell everybody nowadays, I mean, I put out the truth. That's what I do. And actually that would be another Tom Kyer quote. He's like, Kyle teaches the truth. I don't go down a path of, maybes and what ifs. Like, here's the hardcore. I know this is going to work. Historically, this has worked. We've seen it on video. This has worked, and that's what we should be training, not some, what people want to happen or what they think is going to happen, but more like, hey man, like we know this works. So like teach the truth. That's what I tell people. Don't make up stuff.
Yeah, and it comes across. I mean, as I told people at the beginning of this, in your intro, you better be quick when you post your training calendar, because it's gone. Slots are gone. It's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing to see how quickly that happens. And it's testament to what you're training. So can we now talk? So we gave everybody good information on what they should do if they're just starting out, where they should go, how they should get there, how to evaluate basically an instructor, and how they put a course together. I want to talk a little bit more on that, but what I really think is interesting is I would call your training like, it's kind of the same way, Bill approaches it too. You're training people to really shoot, meaning to shoot, for life or death situations, and your use of the ranges and movement and all of that is so important. And you put that in right at the beginning, with people. You get them doing things that take them way out of their comfort zones. It's counterintuitive to the way a lot of other people used to train. Can you talk about your evolution and how you got to that point to where, the other thing I want to talk about, it might just lead into it, so I'm just going to mention it, is the transitions that you have. I mean, you incorporate blades into your training, which I think is fantastic, and it's all synergistic. And can you kind of talk about your evolution in that, and why people have to be very careful if they're training with the idea of, I want to protect myself, my family, and really be able to use a firearm to do so. This is what I'm training for. Some of the training conditions have to be, truly realistic. The positions you shoot from, some of the challenges of gunfighting, just true gunfighting, is very different than I think what a lot of people imagine.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously some of that's based on real world experience, but I'm the first to tell people, my real world experience is I would say it's mediocre at best, if not low level. But with that, in the time that I've been doing this, because of who I'm training in the Gov, I get direct feedback on what's working and what's not. So, the thing with that is that, there's certain things that we know are going to happen. And there's certain ways to make it to where we can get a higher level win out of that in training. I'll give you an example like that. Most people can probably, if they've trained a little bit, if they've taken a handful of classes, they'll probably get this. So again, I'm kind of giving away the golden goose here, but like, right. If you ask most people, what is the purpose of shooting on the move? Doesn't matter, rifle or pistol, doesn't matter. What's the purpose of that? To be completely honest with you, whether I'm training a LE unit or civilian, and most military, but the JSOC units, they're a little bit different, and they already know. But if you ask that question, you will never, it's a 99% or you're not going to get the correct answer. And here's what's scary is most people don't even know the correct answer. Right. So if I look at my time in service and I look at the time that I've been training people who are still in service, who are doing this, years ago, I figured out the number one reason we are doing shooting on the move is to create a safe background shot. That's a 100%er for a patrol cop and a civilian. Now a SWAT team guy, he could have reason number 2 or 3. A military guy could have reason number 2 or 3. So I would ask, whoever I'm training, like, what's the secondary reason that you do shooting on the move? And the answer is historically, and like, I mean, we can document, we've got thousands. I mean, at this point, I've trained way over 50,000 people. The second reason you're doing shooting on the move is to get to a better fighting position. and just those two things, just the first two, like most people don't know that. And so the way that they're training shooting on the move is not conducive to creating a safe background shot or getting to a better fighting position, because they're not training it correctly. And so like that right there, you know, some people would say, well, that's, you know, you're advanced. It's not, I don't really consider that advanced. It's just the correct knowledge, you know? And so if you know that, and you know that that's a truism, and you start accepting that, it's going to change the way you train shooting on the move. And now, instead of wasting time on doing something that's, you know, a method of shooting a move that's never going to happen, and we can't even, I'll go one further, we can't even find videographic evidence of the way that I see some people train shooting. You can't find it in the real world, but the way that I train it, I can find it. I'll give you 10 videos right now.
Right.
So like just something like that is kind of like, you know, that's what I'm doing. You know, I'm not wasting time on things that aren't the truth, that aren't real. And that's just one example. I mean, there's tons of examples. I mean, you know, barricades are another one. You know, barricades are, you know, I use the term barricade to basically say, you know, any kind of, you know, cover or concealment. I just use a generic term, because when I say barricade in the training realm, most people can wrap their mind around, you know, a barricade on the range. But when you look at the barricades on a range, they're not even real, right? I mean, it's a piece of plywood that's 3/4 of an inch thick that you can't even mount if you needed to. Probably the biggest thing is you don't have a long wall, right? So if right here pointing this way, you don't have a long wall, and that changes the dynamic a little bit. So when you see guys who are training that kind of thing on the range, and I see it, and I'm like, well, I've actually done that for real. Like that's one of the things I've done for real. And I'm like, there's no way you're not. That is not how it's going to work, dude. So those are a couple of examples of, like, you know, I take what I know is real based on my experience and others' experience that I've trained, and I go, well, hey, this is the way we should do it, because this is what it is. It's not a video game. It's not a USPSA match, you know, and nothing against that. I mean, and that's a totally different thing. Like if you shoot USPSA, you should do cover and concealment a totally different way. You should not do it like a military and LE guy needs to do it. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting cat, man.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, since I was always somebody who just I was only interested in from the self-protection aspect, and I never got into competition, you know, shooting or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just, you know, my interests were different. What I think is fascinating is when you ask people, like you said, you ask people, hey, why do you shooting on the move? What is the idea? The idea of getting the correct background shot. People don't understand. I'm surprised how many people, you know, a basic idea of, you know, shooting a weapon don't take into account until you point it out oftentimes, you know, oh, by the way, what's behind whatever you're shooting? You know, what are you doing? You know, what, you know, you're responsible for the shot. That seems to be something that gets dismissed in a lot of the people I know that haven't trained with a group like you, or, you know, like you mentioned, Bill or anybody like that. You guys are very good at pointing that out. And there are a couple other people that are big on that, but that's what I really like about your approach. It's very much you train, you know, you train like you're going to fight. And that sometimes is inconvenient, and, you know, like reality can be inconvenient and disappointing sometimes. And, you know, but that's how you have to, you know, go forward. I mean, that's how you're going to end up using this tool, and you've got to be realistic about, you know, how you train with it.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. And then, you know, the second part of your question there about the weapon transitions and working other things like blades. I mean, you know, that in itself, what I found odd, we've kind of, me and a handful of other guys, we've kind of worked this out of the training industry at this point. We've gotten to the point where we've made it such a known that I think most people understand it. You know, when I was coming up, I'm talking about like mid 90s, you know, like pre 9/11, we trained a lot of rifle to pistol transition. That was like a thing.
Right.
Post 9/11 in the GWAT, 20 years, I can count on two hands the guys who've done that overseas. And every one of them that has done it, well, I shouldn't say everyone. The majority of it, it's been a problem. The primary weapon, the rifle, was not working. It got shot or something happened to it. Right. Some kind of catastrophic malfunction. So when you look at that, it's like, do you really need to train that a lot? Do we need to spend 2 hours shooting an M4 or a rifle dry and transitioning to a pistol? Because you got to ask yourself, how did you get in that position? Like you're going to tell me as a lower 48, continental US law enforcement officer, you went through 30 rounds on an M4?
Yeah.
I mean, does anyone, and I'm not saying it, I mean, if it's happened, I definitely would like someone to email me this instance that it's happened. But before you email it, make sure that those 30 rounds were effective and that somebody wasn't just shooting to shoot because they were scared.
Right.
And then they transitioned to their pistol. This is an unrealistic thing. But I'll tell you what is a realistic thing is a SWAT team on an entry, and they come to an area where the clearance problem is very tiny. Could be an attic, could be bathroom stalls, could be, whatever, something super small. The transition from rifle to pistol to clear that area, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But that's not dynamic, and we're not shooting a gun dry to do that, right?
Right.
That would be one example. And you mentioned blade stuff. I mean, the blade thing as a whole, I don't think anybody's going to argue with, I was the only guy doing that for years in the shooting industry. And I've actually, I've saved the screenshots of everybody telling me like it's a waste of time and it's stupid, blah, 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 and all that. And now you can't swing a dead cat without people, now everybody's a blade guy, right?
Right.
But you look at the blade, and we have documented cases of military and law enforcement transitioning to a blade to use it. That's a big deal. I mean, if somebody wants to come to a class and talk about the rifle weapon retention, I would invite anyone to let me see your rifle weapon retention curriculum. And I'll tell you that if we can intro the blade into it, I'll make it 100 times better.
Yeah.
And I'll do it in sub 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Maybe an hour.
The use of the blade, the way you guys teach, and it's a true tool. It's a true leverage tool for you guys. Obviously, it's also very effective itself. But it's interesting how I've seen you guys move people using the blade, and it's very effective training, and it also is the same principles, and the verbiage you guys use is good on both ends. I mean, the feeder receiver and all of that is just, it's so clear. It's such clear language. And and I just had a friend who recently went through in Texas a course with some of your friends, and same thing. That's what he said. He came away understanding so much more. And he's a grappler, and he didn't understand. He goes, "Why would I have a blade? Why would I have a blade if I'm learning a distance tool?" He thought of the firearm that way, and it just really opened his eyes. But as a grappler, he said, "Oh, this just enhances everything I know leverage wise, and it can be an amazing tool, to be used close in when I'm there." And what I like about the reason I'm trying to get this in with everybody is people tend to think one way and one way only, meaning, okay, now I'm doing combative, so that's just brain and body. Okay, now I'm doing knife fighting, so now I'm just doing knife fighting. Well, now I'm going to my firearm, and they think of them as three separate things rather than synergistically working together. And you guys just naturally do that. I just think and you obviously were one of the first people to do that. And it's funny how people fight but one of the blessings I think of the sandbox has been that a lot of the assumptions were thrown out the window when reality hit, and people just care about what works. And you guys keep getting, not only your training methodologies keep getting very good data back on the effectiveness of that approach.
Yeah. And the other thing I would tell people too is, two other points on the blade. There's going to be people like, hey, we can't carry this. It's like, nobody's going to sign off on it. It's like, okay, that's fine. But let's do counter edge weapon, because I'll be 100% honest with you. Number one, and Tom can talk about this like ad nauseum, but like when I hear people say we do blade defense or we do knife defense, I'm like, well, your verbiage right now is not correct. Right. There's no defense. There's a counter to it. You need to get that, and words, I think do matter in this kind of game. So if you're not going to use a blade offensively, that's fine. At least understand it on the counter side so you can counter blades, right? Yeah. That was the first point. The second point would be, if you think about it logically, before this interview, I ate at Longhorn Steakhouse. It's literally right next to the hotel. You know what they gave me when I ordered? Steak knife. Gave me a blade.
Yeah.
I mean, so, we look at the things that happen, when real world situations happen. I mean, anything that's happened recently, I mean, there's blades everywhere. Most people give them to you because they just don't understand the power of it, which is a PSYOC saying from way back. The power of the blade. I mean, it's not just we're talking about how it's the mindset piece of it. It's understanding it in its full circle. So that's fine. Hey, you can't carry a blade at your unit. That's not a thing. I can still make you better because I can tell you how to counter a blade when one gets presented to you. And right now, with the way that a lot of law enforcement units are they've got the microscope on them and stuff. Are you going to be legit to engage on a blade? I don't know. I mean, at this point, I think the jury's out on everything for those guys, but at least know how to counter it.
Yeah.
I would tell a guy named Harley Elmore.
Yep, no, I have his rat he made for me. Yeah.
Harley Elmore's probably, as far as teaching goes, he teaches counter edge weapon. I mean, I've still got some old videos he sent me years ago. I mean, the way that he teaches that is absolutely phenomenal. And he's taught a lot of cops counter edge weapon. So yeah, that's the aspect on that. Like it doesn't, but once again, we're kind of bleeding into mindset a little bit, right? If you tell somebody something about a blade, they're like, oh yeah, fuck blades. I'm never going to carry that. And I will readily admit there's more weirdos in the blade industry than there are in the gun industry. I think anybody would agree on that.
Oh yeah.
I would tell people you might want to look at, and I tell this to classes all the time. I would base any kind of blade or counter edge weapon work that you're going to do as a department or as a military unit. And the military units, that is for sure a thing that we've done because, there's machetes, all over Horn of Africa, and everywhere else they deploy. I mean, most of the rest of the world is a blade culture, whereas, the United States is more of a gun culture. And that's hard for a lot of people to wrap their mind around, but it is a truism. I would tell people that pick these guys that come from a family-based system that is, probably an Eastern-based system like the Philippines, like the PSYOC family or the Atienza family. These guys have been doing this longer than we've been a country. Right. You can't really argue that. I'll make the statement in classes sometimes. I'm like, hey, don't learn blade stuff from a white guy, which I'm like the whitest guy in the world, but unless he learned it from a Filipino family-based system, because those guys, they invented it. They got it, man. They've been doing it forever. So there's a couple.
And it's really well thought out. Like you're making such a good point. I hear people all the time. Well, if I'm not going to carry it, like I'll train. I train all over the world, and I'm sure you've run into this. Well, we can't carry firearms over there. Well, I still train. What what a firearm does, how it is, and what the realities are facing somebody that has a firearm. Because just because it's illegal in that country, it's rife. All the criminals have firearms there.
Sure.
And so there's a chance that, if you are facing something like that, same thing with a blade, you may, especially as like you said, a law enforcement professional, there's a much greater chance you're going to face a blade these days. Especially give you an example of the UK. When I was over there, they had an influx of immigration from countries that are very blade oriented, very comfortable with blades. And they couldn't believe that people didn't use blades for criminal purposes just because there was a law, when they came from. And it was a rude awakening in the UK that people all of a sudden were facing, a huge knife crime. And they had a huge problem there that they really didn't have an answer to, because they refused to train people correctly for that, especially their law enforcement personnel. And it's interesting that you said, hey, okay, at least learn what a blade does so you can learn what the counters are to this, because, there's a good chance that you're going to be facing something like this.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's no different than with a pistol or a rifle. I mean, if, that would be more of your other side of people who like to outsource their violence. But, people who are like, I don't like guns, I'm going to call the police. They outsource their violence. They don't want to do it themselves, and that's fine. But understand what the weapon can do. I mean, if you're in the Walmart parking lot and a guy's got a handheld pistol and he's 100 yards away, I mean, I'll be completely honest with you. I can probably, if you gave me 20 to 30 minutes, I can name the guys on the planet who can take that shot.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that's the threat. Get in your car and leave. I mean, but what if they don't know that? Maybe they don't maybe they freeze up and now the guy's not at 100 yards. Now he's at 10 yards or 15 yards. Just understand the full capabilities of something. You don't have to do it. And I would tell you that all the guys you've mentioned here and all the guys I've mentioned here, we don't have an emotional attachment to it. If guys are like, hey, we can't carry blades. Okay. I mean, I don't care. I mean, it's not, I don't think you're a bad person because you don't carry one. I mean, I think it's odd, but especially considering how they're everywhere. I mean, you go to a grocery store, you go to a gas station, they're sitting there. I mean, I would like to know how to use one if I needed to, but that's fine. Just understand the full aspect of it. So counter edge weapon is a huge deal.
Yeah. And you guys do it in a very, like your training, I watched you do it in a very, I mean, I can't imagine being introduced to it that you wouldn't want to train it, regardless of whether you're going to carry a blade, because it's really interesting. What I find is if you understand what a tool does or a weapon does, it demystifies it for you. You respect it. You go, okay, I understand the optimal way to use this because I've been properly shown by my instructor how to do this. Somebody who actually has, used it and done it. And then you can deal with reality. Because I find, especially the reason I bring up blades all the time is because there's just this fantasy world out there about it. Like there's all this, and it's a very straightforward tool, and it does things really well. There's something that does really, really well. And once you understand that, you can respect, somebody's there, and you can also tell a lot about the way a person deploys it, most likely what the training level is, which also will tell you a lot.
Absolutely. And I mean, just on the history aspect of it, I mean, again, you look at some of these foreign countries that guys deploy to. I mean, when we say it's a blade culture, we mean that in the aspect of you get off the plane in, X country in Africa or the Middle East. I mean, you can, on the way to the hotel, you can stop and buy a blade.
Right.
Like it's right there at the market, that's not necessarily true with guns everywhere. Yeah. I mean, just that statement, that's it's hard for a lot of people to wrap their mind around that. And when you ask, if you ask people like, would you consider, whatever, this country a gun culture? Some people, oh yeah, there's guns there, but it's like it's not a gun culture.
Right.
The United States is a gun culture. I mean, essentially, with the with the exception of a handful of states, half a dozen states, you can buy a gun within 2 days,
Yeah.
like is there, you can go to Dick's, you can go to, Cabela's, you can go to, Bass Pro Shop, you can go to a local gun store. I mean, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting them, which I think is great. That's what this country's founded on, but, just understanding that, especially if you go overseas and like, I did a thing overseas just a few years ago where I was not flying into that country with a gun. I can tell you that. And but landed at the airport and stopped at the grocery store on the way to the hotel, and you go to the aisle that every grocery store has, and I know what I'm looking for with the trade of a blade. I mean, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be an Amtac Minuteman, but it's good enough, and I can make a sheath out of the packaging that it came in, and I'm good for while I'm there. I mean, I'm as good as I can be.
Right, and that's another great reason to do it, because it's just about everywhere you go you can have some sort of an improvised blade, any way, shape, or form. So, and the reason I want people to hear all this is because you have a very complete approach to the realities of using tools to protect yourself. Yes, you're firearms based, and yes, you're mostly known for that, but it's not just firearms. There's other things to consider, and just mentioning how many places we end up traveling where we can't carry firearms even if we wanted to, and so you have to understand the other side of the equation, and I think you do an excellent job of that.
Thank you.
I read your article that you had up about choosing an instructor, and I thought one of the things that you pointed out there, it can butt hurt some people and do it, but I thought it was really, really accurate. The idea of, if you're going to learn to train to protect yourself and to be in there, having somebody who has faced that and used that in a professional sense and had to actually go up against another armed individual, or dealing in the scenarios, is absolutely critical. Can you address that idea and why? And then also, I hear this a lot in the community when I'm talking. And again, I have all my friends in the former world, the military and contractor world, but it's my civilian side of the house where I always hear this, that they're oftentimes they're getting instructions saying, well, you really shouldn't learn from, a lot of these ex-spec ops guys, because, you really need to learn from a cop, because, they're facing basically the legal side of things. So, that's how they try to really scare people. And what I mean by scare people is, oftentimes I hear people throw down the legal issues as a barrier to incompetency, meaning, these guys were just trained, their rules of engagement are very different. They're going to train you to do dangerous stuff. Come to me because I'm going to give you the right things. And oftentimes I see instructors scaring the crap out of people rather than encouraging them to say, hey, here's the black swan event. Here's what you do. You're completely justified at this level to do it, and here's how you engage. And then everything else is pretty clear. I mean, it's fairly clear to go over the legal ideas, and your training easily does that without having to hammer it into somebody. And just, which I think, if you need this information to save your life, you don't want anything installed in you that's going to cause hesitation. And I see that, but can you kind of address it from the standpoint of make sure somebody has some real knowledge when you're training for this, not competition or anything like that. You can get trained by competition by people that aren't, former operators. But what's the importance of that? What are the dangers that you've seen of people who either have lower level, obviously you're not naming instructors, but I mean, instructors who don't have that type of background training things? What are the challenges people are facing if they do that? And then number two, the idea of, that the spec ops guys are just Wild West, and they're just going to teach you, all this crazy stuff that only applies to the military, where they don't have to worry about any of that.
Well, the first part of the question, here's what I tell people is that if I was going to get back into IDPA or get into USPSA right now, I would go to a guy who is a grandmaster in one of those disciplines. I mean, when I left, I was a master class. So if I wanted to be let's say my goal is to be a grandmaster at USPSA production, I would go to a buddy of mine who is a grandmaster in USPSA production because he's done it. Like, why would I try to invent all that on my own? To me, it makes no sense. On the real world aspect of it, I honestly believe at a certain point that it's a little bit of an ego thing. I think people should have probably a harder look at their own mindset and their own emotional attachment to different, titles. Me and you are not going to do open heart surgery right now on a patient in the operating room. So why would it now, if we were going to do that, I would want to learn that from the best cardiologist or heart doctor that there is, right? He's done it, so I tell guys, like, I don't understand, like, how you and I mean, I think most people would agree, like, post 9/11, the GWAT guys, I mean, I would consider myself on the lower tier of some of my friends, like I admit to, Bill is here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Bill did 10 years more than me. He did, at least 7 or 8 more deployments than me. But we've both done the job, and we've both gotten our hands dirty for Uncle Sam. And, that's a big deal when you talk about, like, I know what it's going to look like. I can tell people, like, that, like, you shooting here like this is not going to work. You need to do this, like, I've done it. I've already burned that rep. Right. So that's what I would tell people. Not to say that mechanically can you learn something from somebody as far as shooting goes. Yes, you can, but I kind of break it down like this for people. There in this game that we're in, there are shooters and there are killers. And that sounds like a very harsh or maybe a very egotistical statement, or, I can understand how, but it's the truth. And I relate it to people like this. Most of the guys at the 2 tier 1 units in this country, the 2 units that are directly responsible for most direct action on a high level, I probably have 3 or 4 students in every class that can outshoot them in every capacity. Straight up. I mean, I'm being 100% honest with you. And most of those guys will tell you, yeah, that guy will beat me in a competition. Absolutely. He'll shoot tighter than me on a bull, blah, blah, blah. What you're not going to do is they're a killer. They understand the idiosyncrasies of getting that done, whether it's the movement, whether it's the shot placement, whether it's the, they don't get a high heart rate when this happens because they've already done it a few times. It's like taking trash out, kind of thing. So people need to understand that. And I would, I don't buy into the shooting is shooting as far as the dynamic of real world goes. You need to get with somebody who's done this deal a little bit of time. The second part of the question, like, as far as the military goes, like, in my opinion, what I've seen from guys that either from my old place or our brothers down south, they are less likely to get involved in something because they understand it more. You know what I mean? Like, they understand their skill level. They know what's going to happen. And because of that, they can ID, pre-incident indicators quicker and get out of the situation faster. You know what I mean? I wouldn't say, not equate it to Wild West. I would equate it to, they're like, hey, our highest level win right now is to leave. I don't need to do anything right now. It's not a thing. Yep. Because of their experience level. And I would also tell people that those same guys, when it comes to a place where they're in a corner or it is time to they're not going to hesitate, because they've already done it. And I try to tell people, like, I'm not teaching you. I teach people how to think to a certain degree, but I start with, there's already a threat type scenario, weapon in hand kind of thing. What I don't get into is the left side of that, which would be like, okay, I see a guy and he's, he's motherfucking me, and and like, what should I, I'm like, well, just why don't you just leave? You know what I mean? Like, so I think you're going to have a hard time not learning better from these guys who have a shit ton of experience. And quite honestly, post 9/11, there's a lot of guys who have a lot of reps. I mean, a lot of reps. And
it's
that
amazing.
Is everything tell you, it could be something like we talked about earlier, like how to shoot on the move. Like, here's what you want to do, man. Because that guy, that guy's right-handed. You need to do this because he can't make that transition. Or, hey man, make sure you put this shot here because you look at what he's wearing. You want to take the time and get this shot. Or, hey, you're this far away, you should really think about this. Or, hey, dude, that guy's 2 yards in front of you. Here's what you need to do. I don't know how you're gonna get that without having that experience. Now, I do know that, in part referencing that article that you're talking about that I wrote, I talked in there about the regurgitation instructor. The guy who hears it, he hears somebody like me or Bill or somebody like that put it out, and then he's like, well, here's what you do, and he's saying what we've already said, but he doesn't have that experience level. I think that's part of it too, and I want to make sure people are clear. I'm not like saying I'm the ultimate answer. I mean, I'm not, dude, I don't have an ego in the game. I mean, I readily admit that there's a lot of guys with more experience than me, but, I reach out to those guys. I mean, I tell people I'm a has-been, never was at this point.
Right.
I'm late 40s. I mean, I haven't gotten my groove on in 20 years at this point. So, but I do get the real world feedback, and I might change a little bit of my stuff, but I honestly, I haven't seen a lot where guys are coming back saying, anything's too dramatically different. But yeah, man, I mean, I would not want to learn free fall parachuting from a guy who's never jumped out of a plane before. That sounds odd to me. Yeah. You know what I mean?
No, it's an excellent point. The other thing I've really found by being around individuals like that and training with them, they're the calmest individuals. Like, the more highly proficient they are, for the most part, that they're excellent to learn from, because they are the first ones. If it's avoidable, they avoid. If there's anything there, it truly is for that, for a civilian, that black swan event where you devoid choice, and now you've got to take action. Now you want that skill set that they can train you in. But they also, I've found that the opposite is true. Meaning, most of the people that train with individuals like that truly understand that rare time when it would ever be justified to respond that way, and they actually come off with more behavioral changes, meaning they're actually calmer. They're actually things that may have triggered them before, they let go, or they catch it earlier, and they get themselves out of there because they understand the responsibility of carrying, now, basically their own blaster, that can, do real damage, but also can do real damage to them if they deploy it, in a reckless manner. And I haven't found that Wild West cowboy that's out there. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but in my dealings with all the people that they talk about, the true ones that truly have that background, I have yet to find somebody who is, reckless in their instruction or in their approach to the subject.
Yeah. And I think that's because a lot of these guys that, high level of skill, you need to probably have a mediocre to high level of hesitation.
Yeah.
And I would tell people what's dangerous is a guy that's got a high level of skill and a low level of hesitation.
Right.
That is going to be a problem. And I think, there were probably a lot of us returning from a deployment that we were probably like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a problem for a while.
And thank God, you've got a community and a tribe and a city around you that can kind of, something you don't have to worry about. But I tell people, like, on the BJJ side, like, the higher belt guys go in jiu-jitsu, the less they're not going to be the guy who gets in a bar fight because somebody, mean item, you know what I mean? Because they know that if they get in a fight, I'm going to hurt a guy,
Yeah.
But that on the gun side of that, on the super violent side of that, you can kind of understand when to get out of a problem, if you need to. And I mean, there's going to be some problems where you need to probably deal with it. But again, that learning how to mitigate that, learning how to basically de-escalate your force. You know what I mean? Like, does this guy really need me to draw a gun on it right now? Probably not, coming down from that. I'm with you. I've never seen a guy that's, got the background like me that I've never seen that Wild West thing. I've seen people talk about it and kind of be like, but I've never really seen it.
Yeah, I've seen the people trying to be that, that don't have that background, but are trying to act like they do have that background. I've seen them trying to pose that way. But yeah, none of the competent people. I mean, I remember one of the first discussions I ever had, hanging out with Tom, his whole thing is, he doesn't go out drinking. He doesn't go out drinking with the guys because if anything happens, he knows he doesn't have the ability to not, get involved and protect his friends. If it's one of those situations, he just knows that about himself, and he's there. And I think that's really responsibility. I mean, I think a lot of people listening to this are probably surprised that we're talking about what they would think extraneous subjects rather than just the meat and potatoes. But the reason I really want to talk to you is, hey, there's enough of your stuff that's out there. If they want to see the meat and potatoes and they want to see exactly, how you approach things, there's lots of information out there. But I think what they need to understand is that they need to understand the thought behind the instructor. How does he think and how does he look at the subjects and the difficult questions? I mean, you've gone over a lot of difficult subjects with people that aren't the fun things to talk about, but it's absolutely critical, because what you're training, you're not training a guy, for putting together widgets. You're training somebody to possibly have to use deadly force to save themselves, and you want to give them the best information, and you also want to make sure they don't do something that doesn't deserve that response. And that's a huge responsibility as an instructor. And the reason I want people to hear this is because I get questions all the time about this trainer, that trainer, this coming in. So when I put out a subject matter expert like yourself, I want them to hear you talk like this, because I know this is not the typical information you're going to get from a lot of the more generic approaches that I've seen out there.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to tell people too, like, my training, again, my real world stuff is has been, never was. My training thing, I don't want to throw out numbers just because I don't want people to start tracking dudes or whatever, but like, multiple guys I've trained have been in a lot of engagements, both on the LE side and the mill side. I mean, like I'll say triple digits. Yep. So it's, and again, don't take that as I'm trying to brag and I'm trying to be like, I've been doing this, a lot of this is I've been doing it longer than anybody else. So, I mean, I'm in like year 17 or 18 now. So, I've been doing it for a long time, but, I've never had any of those guys hit me up and be like, hey dude, like, it was bad, it didn't work out. I've never experienced that. And again, not saying that I'm the end all be all answer. It's just that I've seen a lot of real world successes.
Yeah. And again, I mean, people know just from the people I bring on here, the people that recommend you says everything. Yeah, to me. And that's just it. I mean, it's hard for people to visually, a lot of stuff looks the same when you're just looking at training and you're uninitiated and you're trying to figure it out. And that's, my goal here is to introduce them into true subject matter experts that are out there doing the work. And, you're giving yourself, you're saying, yes, there are a lot of other guys that probably have more recent experience that are in there, but you're training a lot of those people that are going out there getting that experience, and that says a lot, and you're the choice, and that's just a fact. And that's because of the product that you put out and what in the feedback. And the other thing I think is really interesting is you you also are very open to feedback. And I mean, you don't, I would imagine your principles stay the same, but if you find a better methodology that gets better results, I'm sure that you're open to changing anything. You're not going to stick yourself with a legacy program if there's something that you discover that gets a better result for your people.
Absolutely. I mean, that's look at the curriculum now for open enrollment. I mean, it's teaching these guys how to teach themselves. I if you would have told me 3 years ago I was going to be doing that, I'd be like, how the hell am I going to do that? That's something I came up with. You look back on probably, good or bad, what a lot of people, even in the competition world, look at now is they're like, well, he's the guy who started shooting bullseyes fast at 25. Before me, nobody really did it. Because a lot of people, I think, didn't really think it could be done. But I took a lot of those lessons learned from IDPA and USPSA and kind of looked at, like, do I really need 10 or 5 or 2 minutes to shoot this? Like, I don't. Like, I can do it in 20 seconds and get the same damn score. That was an evolution. I mean, that's just me kind of tracking what everybody else, what the students are doing, what the government guys that contract me are doing, what the LE guys that contract me are doing, and saying, hey, like, we can actually do this. If we change the way we do fundamentals a little bit, we can get accuracy and speed at the same time. Whereas back when I started doing that, like I had multiple people that are pretty famous in this game tell me that, like, you're not going to be able to do that, man. Like, you're going to look like an idiot. And I'm like, well, 7-8 years later, who looks like an idiot now? Because now everybody does it,
Yeah.
And which is funny, it's gotten to the point now where a bullseye at speed at 25, like, I've had people come up to me like, they don't even know I came up with it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's such a thing now, and it, like, people don't even know where it came from, which I don't care. I mean, it's not like I'm not trying to, copyright it or some shit, but, like, I just think it's funny that, like, it's so mainstream now that it's not a thing anymore. Which is, I used to give a hat, I give a hat away if a guy passes it, right? And dude, like 5-6 years ago, like, you give away 1 hat per class, maybe. Dude, the class today, I give away eight hats.
I saw the picture you posted. I don't know if it was that class, but yeah, I was cracking up when you said you used to hand out 1, because it was a group of guys. That's testament, man. That's huge.
I mean, think about that, just industry-wide. Like now, guys are like, even if they don't know who I am, even if they don't know I came up with it, it's gotten the whole industry, like, everybody shoots faster and more accurate now, like, on everything, like, it's bizarre. So yeah, that's kind of cool, kind of interesting.
Yeah, and the other thing too that people told me that they get from you too is you're very good at teaching people. I don't think people understand there's fast shooting, there's fast, accurate shooting, but when they say accurate, they think of it more in a competition sense, whereas you train people to take accurate shots that if they miss, they will probably end up hitting an innocent or doing something. The guys that have very elaborate, very specialized missions, they are in very populated areas and they have to take shots in populated areas. And that type of accuracy and speed is a very different skill set than accuracy and speed to engage a shooting target. It's interesting. I mean, because that's a very, very deliberate skill set, and there's a lot more than just the shooting. There's the mindset behind it, and there's the confidence to take the shot.
Yep. And so, like, I basically cut targets in half. I mean, most people know that now. A lot of people don't, but I use half of an IPSC A zone. I don't use the full thing. So a lot of people look at my times and they go, "Oh man, I can do a sub 1.5 draw from concealment into A zone." I'm like, well, that's great, but I don't use the A zone. you know, like, and again, that's just, it's more like, I understand 9 mil, and I understand, 1,000 feet per second. And I kind of get like, gut shot on depending on the round and person and in the medium it's going through, gut shot, on a man at 7 yards is, you're asking a bullet to penetrate a lot and clip an aorta, which is probably not going to happen. But, nobody can get fat in their heart, everybody's got a sternum. You can tap everybody's sternum, what I'm saying? So yeah, I mean, I think like keeping it more realistic. And the thing is, you train like that a lot, and then you do open up the whole A zone, and quite honestly, life's easier because you've got double the target size now to hit. So
yeah,
and of course, recoil doesn't go left and right; it goes up and down. So hence why an A zone is kind of long like it is. But yeah, I mean, it's I try to train it to where it makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really interesting method that you just described. It's a method that's used. They credit the fact that the Brazilian national soccer team, came out of nowhere basically about 20 years ago and did so well, was because they played, I forgot what it's called a much smaller field, and so they have to handle the ball a lot more in that smaller field, and they have to be very quick with ball handling skills, so that when they're given back the full soccer field, their ability to, control the ball and pass to each other is just superior. And it's really interesting when you manipulate training methodologies that way and what that yields you, because I imagine when you have the luxury of the whole A zone, it must feel like, it must feel enormous for you.
Oh, I feel like I'm like, man, this is like, I mean, it's like I know I can pull off the first shot quicker, right? Because I'm bringing it up from the bottom, so it's like the first shot I can go quicker when I got the whole A zone. And, it's like I can be a little bit lazy on recoil control because again, my gun doesn't recoil this way; it just recoils like that. So, yeah, same kind of analogy. I mean, and we know that performance goes down a little bit in real world. I mean, not so much. It's more of like you don't have you don't have a bullseye in the real world. You don't have an A zone in the real world. You have, basically shoulders and a head, and you've got to figure out where's center mass of that. But I think it's still, indexing off that, like landmarking off a human target and understanding how far is the top part of the A zone, how far is that from the shoulders? Because a person really can't hide their shoulders, right? They can hide their chest a little bit with clothing or whatever. And, if you've got earth tone clothes on a brown background, that's definitely a problem at distance for sure. But, hitting on what you're hitting on, I had a buddy of mine that he was the lacrosse coach for a university. He was like an assistant coach, and he would make the guys take the girls' sticks and play. And I don't know if you know anything about lacrosse, but like the way guys cradle the ball in a men's lacrosse stick is a certain way, and a woman's does not have the deep pocket. Kind of the same talking about the soccer guys, and he's like, I just had to do that for, like we would burn that rep once a week, and they couldn't stand it. Like the guys are dropping the ball, they can't keep it in there, they're used to it, but it made their ball handling with that with their real stick, it made it that much better. It's kind of the same analogy, so I think everybody does it.
Oh yeah, it's interesting how there's a book that came out a while back called Talent Code. And the guy went to 7 different premier training facilities, all different disciplines. What was the consistent thing was everybody did a version of that. Everybody did some version that they reduced something, or they played it. They did a lot of slow, deliberate training, deep practice type stuff, which led to amazing fast execution. And it's manipulations like that, like manipulating the size of something, or the lacrosse guys having the smaller pockets, so they have to be more coordinated, so that when they get their sticks back, now it's just they feel like they can go like a light speed. And so I think that's really interesting, and the way you incorporate that into your training with your clients, I think is really interesting. It just, again, you're thinking about you know that, hey, there's going to be some decrement in your abilities when the shit hits the fan. We're going to take that into account. And one of the ways we're going to do that is we're going to manipulate some things so that the real world will probably give you a better opportunity, you know, than I'm going to give you right now.
Yeah. And then, you know, one of the other things we do is that, you know, Tom years ago kind of figured out how to, we can kind of make a guy do an adrenaline dump. And, you know, probably don't want to talk about exactly how we do it on camera.
Right.
We can, and I've done this with guys in classes. I mean, like even open enrollment, because guys have heard about it. They're like, hey, can you make it happen? I'm like, yeah, I can make it happen. But like, you know, let's wait till after.
Know what you're asking for.
And it's pretty interesting because, you know, you can't do it much, right? You can only do it like a couple, 3 times a day to get good results out of it. But when you have somebody, like I had Tom do it to me once, and we videoed it, and you know, what you see in that, and then like I've done it with some people, and I'm like, you know, I'll have them do a simple shooting drill, and then it's like, you know, did you see your front sight? And they're like, hell no. You know, like I have no idea. And I'm like, you know, and they'll mess things up. Like I told them to shoot 2 rounds here, 2 rounds here, whatever. And, you know, they shot 5 and 1 and whatever. And they don't even know they messed it up, right? But you do that to a guy a couple of times, and now he gets used to it. And that's a really good way to get guys, because the adrenaline dump doesn't change. You know, it's the same all the time, whether you're jumping out of an airplane or, you know, riding a wheelie down the interstate or whatever. It's going to be the same push. And if you can get a guy to do his skills that he's trying to do with that adrenaline push, you know, that's a big deal. But I would tell people, like, make sure you're getting with somebody that knows how to do it
safely. Correctly and safely. That's huge.
You know, push-ups and running ain't going to do it. I can tell you that.
No.
but that's a good thing. You know, we've done classes with guys, and like, you know, you can understand that some of those meat eaters like that, that's all they want to do, right? They're like, let's do it again. Let's do it again. And we're like, look, bro, like you've done it like 4 times in a day. Like it's like, it's not good for you. And it's like, we're going to get a negative return here. But that's a good way too, to make guys, you know, it's what I tell people, like me and Bill, like we've done a lot of free fall, right? And, and, you know, we've done 30,000 plus, like I've done a 35,000 footer before, you know, I've done a couple of 30s and I don't know, like a shit ton of 25s. And, you know, first time you do that, man, you're like, fuck, you know, it's fucking wild, right? You're watching the altimeter spin a couple of times, right? Because the altimeter only goes up to like 12. So you got to, you know, did it go twice, or is it 3, you know, whatever. You know, first few times you do that, it's definitely it, but then, you know, by you've done it a few times and you're like, this is just like, again, it's like taking trash out, man. It's like, it's what we do, you know, it's like not a big deal. So it's kind of good to be able to push people in the aspect of that, like, you know, push their training a little bit. And there's definitely some guys that, you know, they need that, right? The guys that are on that are most likely to get into this kind of stuff, SWAT team or a mill unit or whatever, they need to do that, because that's the only way in training we can get them to get that feeling.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I see people, like you say, they get addicted to it rather than understand it's a tool, you know? And I think that's a challenge for people, is they don't understand that you do it to kind of check in on yourself, you know, during that time and stuff. And there's a point of diminishing returns. You have to understand that, because it's hard on your body. I mean, I remember just had a version of that in training. And I just remember the first time I did it, even though it wasn't as physically stressful as I thought it was, the way they got the result, I was mentally exhausted, you know, after doing it. And we only did like three separate reps of it during that day, but it was enough to really, you felt the complete depletion in your body after that, because of all the dump and dealing with it and the reset, you know, that it takes to then do it again. But yeah, you're right. There are just those meat eaters that are out there just going, one more time, one more time, one more time. It's like,
Yeah.
You got it. You got it. You know?
Yeah. I mean, that's an important thing in training too, is, we're talking about, like, we started out with basic stuff and kind of like, you get some guys that they have the ability to stay up here the whole time and, to a point, but like, it's not good sometimes. Like that's another thing about an instructor. When you get that kind of unit, you got to tone those guys down sometimes, because it'll get to the point where, they're doing stuff like that. And it's, they might not be, now they're sacrificing some of the fundamentals maybe a little bit, because they're looking for the end result a little bit more. And it's like, they might have the talent to pull off the end result, a handful of times, but they're still, if they would reduce back to doing it, correctly, fundamentally, it'd be 100%er, but they want to train at that high level. So that's another thing that I don't know that a lot of guys deal with in my work, but, I definitely see it sometimes where, I'm like, hey, okay, you got to know when to call it. That's the thing. You got to know when to call it, man. That's a hard one for a lot of guys that are doing this for a living.
Hey man, I want to respect your time, but I got one last question that people have been asking. And this is a universal with a lot of people, especially new people. What mistakes have you seen people do when they go to buy their first firearm? They've had no training whatsoever. What do you tell a brand new person when they're seeking out, to buy their first, firearm? Most likely it's going to be a pistol. What's important to you, rather than, some people they'll just blurt out whatever their favorite, model is, and they'll say, yep, that's it. That's universal for everybody. Yeah, I'll get this. How do you look at that, and how do you guide clients? And of course, then just a little bit, maybe you could go into on the idea that, I notice a lot of guys, starting to transfer over to more red dots from iron sights. But there's pros and cons to both sides of that. And you've written some good stuff on that. And if you just kind of give people your opinion on choosing your first firearm, what you think is important versus that. And then of course, the other question I get from a lot of guys, and these are new guys that they're getting, I'm going to get the red dot right away, or I'm going to do this. Well, what's your opinion on all that?
As far as the first firearm goes, if it's a pistol right now, I would tell people to buy the Glock. I think it's Glock 44. Is that right? 22. I think it is.
Which one? What?
I think Glock 44, isn't that the 22 caliber?
Oh yeah. Okay. I was wondering which caliber you got.
Yeah. I think that's it. So I would tell people, like, if you're new, like, I don't care, woman, man, I don't give a shit who you are. Right. Buy that and shoot it. And here's why: because the felt recoil is almost non-existent. The ammo is really cheap. Yeah. Manipulations are the same as any of the Glock platforms. It's the same size magazine. It's just, if you've ever seen one, the internals are different for the 22 caliber round, but that is going to alleviate a lot of problems with trigger. That's going to make it so they understand support grip a little bit better, because it's not a violent recoil out of the gate. They're going to get more out of that than anything. This has been my experience. I would shoot that for a while. The next thing I would do is I would buy a full frame 9mm. So a 17 or even a 34. Something that, but full frame, because the felt recoil is a little bit less. And I would work that now, because the things that they're gonna find when they shoot a full size gun like that is that their support grip is going to have to be a little bit better. And the full frame is easier to learn on than a compact or a subcompact. Mm-hmm. even though, most people are not going to carry a full frame unless they're a bigger person. And that's I would rep that for a while, then if this is still their thing and, they're into it. Yeah. I've had success with it. The training's been correct. Then now I would get into what you're going to carry. Now some guys like again, a big guy, like somebody like Bill. I mean, Bill's like 6'4". Right. Bill can carry a Glock 17 concealed super easy. I can't because I'm, 5'8" and 100 something pounds. Then if you're going to go to a compact or a subcompact, work your way down like that. That's what I would tell people to do as far as the gun goes. What I see happen is exactly the opposite. I see people buy a Glock 19 or a Glock 43X out of the gate. Mm-hmm. The felt recoil is tremendous. Yep. They don't have enough reps with their support grip to make it, to understand what correct is. And they're trying to do it all on one platform. And that's going to be a longer road. Now I could understand people are saying, well, you just said buy 3 different guns. Well, yeah. But that would be my perfect world. Yeah. That would be how I would tell people to do that. That's where I've seen the most success in helping new shooters out. As far as the red dot thing goes, at this point in 2022, we're at the point where, it is the go. The irons are essentially dead at this point. There's too many red dot companies that are making pistol red dots that are just that they're not going to fail. We know that now. I mean, we've got them. They won't fail. The red dot is, again, I do rifle the same way now. If someone can learn, they should learn on a red dot. And then after they've done that and they're like, okay, I got it. They've been to some classes. They've worked up to a medium or an advanced class. I would tell them your next evolution will be to take the dot off and now just kind of burn the rep with irons, not because we're worried about the dot failing and you having to go to irons, but it's more of to make a complete package of a shooter. I have found that going back to irons from a dot, it just makes me better with a dot. Cause you learn more about what you can get away with. And, I trained my son, my son's 16 right now. I built him a 300 blackout. He hasn't shot iron sights yet. Wow. I started him on a dot because it's easier. It's a single point of reference. Yep. You don't have to line up 2 things. I don't have to go through this entire concept of target focus versus a sight focus. So I would tell everybody, just go to the dot right away, because I would say if you give, the industry in this aspect, I will tell you this, they're very backwards in it. And I can talk about that a little bit if you want, but sure. In 5 years, the iron sight thing is going to be way more than dead. It's right. Going to be, the only reason it's not completely dead right now is because the manufacturers of pistols refuse to make a universal mounting plate or a universal mounting for red dots. Right. If the big manufacturers like SIG and Glock, the big guys would make a universal, and I'm kind of referencing, like if you look at an M4, we have a Picatinny rail on top and it's universal. If there was a universal footprint for a red dot on a pistol, we would already be there. The manufacturers aren't doing that, and because they're not doing that, the optic manufacturers are not doing that. But I can see in the future where that could happen. I wish it would right away, but the dot is the way to go. It's just too easy to shoot. It's way more accurate. It's way faster, and the biggest thing, is that there's so many high quality red dots out there that nowadays that they're not going to break. They're not going to fail.
That's both those things super solid on weapon, your weapon selection out of the box, what you start with. And then It's so funny to hear you say that on the red dot, because that is something I think a lot of people are going to respond to. I think they're going to really to hear you say that, because I I think I obviously that's where it seems everything's going. I remember my transition when I first started shooting the dots. It took a little bit, it wasn't just getting used to it. It was surprising. You'd think it would be easier right away, but I really had to change the way I looked at things. And, that's just me as a very basic level shooter. So starting with the dot, and then, becoming a better dot shooter by using your sights after you've really, put the time in. That's a really cool approach. And I think people are going to really enjoy that. So, thanks for that.
Yeah, I mean, if guys think about it, iron sights are actually the advanced thing.
Yeah.
The dot is simple.
Yeah.
With iron sight, you're lining up two things and the target. I mean, that's I mean, just in concept and principle, it's more advanced. Whereas the dot, you're just looking at the target and superimposing the dot and letting it eat. So yeah, that's the way to go.
That's great. Hey, Bill, I mean, I know you put your training out, and, obviously I've told everybody, jump on if you have your, if you've got your fundamental down and you're really ready to take that next step, one of your classes is absolutely where you want to go. Where would you point people? Where would you like people, if they want to learn more about you, what's the best option for them these days? How do you like people to interact with you?
Instagram is like, Instagram's kind of what I really put the effort into. I mean, we have Facebook, but
Yeah.
Facebook's difficult to monitor. When you get to the point that I'm at, Instagram is way easier to deal with. But we got Instagram and Facebook, and we have a Tumblr account for people who are like, you get some people like, I'm not doing Instagram or Facebook. And it's like,
Right.
Well, we've got just a blog. So generally all my posts go to all three. The website, I mean, if they Google my name, they'll find the Shopify website with got all the info on it. It's got links to gear. It's got links to the shooting tests. It's got, the tribe on there. It's got, so you got Syoc and Bill, Master Chim and Harley Elmore, and, it's got all the Atienza guys. It's got links to it. You could spend a lot of time on my website just wandering around. I put, a select few articles that I wrote back in the day. I really don't write anymore. Those are all from like the aughts and the early teens, 2000s. But yeah, that's how they can find me. The classes are on there for civilian. Just click on civilian. Those are all the civilian classes. I would tell guys that, the classes do fill up pretty quick. I mean,
yeah, they do.
You got about 5 minutes once they launch, but you might get sometimes we get 24 hours, man. I don't know. It's like sometimes it takes a day, but
I was joking to some of the guys talking about it. They're telling me, "Oh shit, I missed." Like he just put it out today, and I'm off. I'm on a waiting list.
Yeah. So what I tell people is, I make a very good habit of on Instagram. I will post like, hey, here's when this class is dropping. It's dropping a week from now,
right.
4 days from now, 3 days from now, tomorrow, today it's dropping at noon Eastern. But keep in mind that I am shadow banned on everything. Obviously, as most gun people are, plus the name of the company is DeFoor Performance Shooting.
Right.
So I've been shadow banned probably since the beginning. So people will have to, if they're looking for me in their feed, it's not going to pop up. So they're going to have to type my entire name out to find a post every day. But I post every day. So, it's always gear or shooting or targets or something like that. So, just tell people to go on there and follow, and they can find out when classes are going to post.
We'll have all that up in our show notes, and we'll probably have my editor will probably put it up as you're talking. So we'll have all that and drive everybody there. And listen, you're so freaking busy. We've corresponded for the last couple of months, going back and forth, finding a good time. And I'm really glad we were able to nail this down. And I appreciate it. After a full day of training, you took the time to do this interview. So I really, really appreciate it, man.
Dude, thank you, man. I mean, I don't do a lot, man. It's like the fifth podcast I've done, I think. So I
Well,
appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We'll get this out to everybody. And when do you head out to, do you do training out of Vegas at all?
I don't. I haven't been to Vegas, and I did SHOT Show a couple of years because I had to. I try to avoid it. I haven't been.
Oh yeah,
back.
I know. It's a nightmare.
I tell people I'm actually at that part in the industry where I don't have to go anymore, which is good. So
it's beautiful.
But no, I've gotten a lot of Vegas time. We did a lot of training out there when I was in the military. So
yeah,
I've done a lot of running on the Strip, man. Like I've got a lot of good long runs on the Strip down there. So I know the city. Just back in a while.
Okay. Well, I'll after this, I'll mention some stuff to you. Well, listen, Bill, thanks so much for this, and everybody, listen. What Bill just laid out, there's so many good things. We'll highlight all of this for you, but it is so rare, especially if you got a new gun person, this is a great interview for them to watch, because this is coming from an individual that very few people get to train with, and rock solid information. So I hope you all appreciate it. Until next time, I'll see you guys. Hey, thanks for watching. If you do like this content, make sure that you have subscribed to the YouTube channel, but also, if you want to see everything that I put out, everything uncensored, straightforward, not squelched by big tech, also join our Rumble channel. It's all down in the show notes. That way you get everything that I put out. Unfortunately, big tech has put a crunch on me being able to get this information to you. That's why I created the alternative channel with Rumble. Also, if you are ready to start training right away, please go to timlarkin.com, sign up for our free masterclass, and start putting together a plan that will minimize the chance of violence coming into your life and your family's life. Thanks again for watching, and please support the channel.